You're crash landing on an alien planet. Only this foreign environment is void of all things man. This world exists in the folds of the universe, in the nooks and crannies of everyday life, and it is overflowing with the essence of immaterialism. An unknown place, sure, yet all too familiar to that which we call the soul. A world that is within us all, one we once called home. Welcome back to the world beyond. They say be careful what you wish for. They say that because you might just get what it is, and you won't be wishing once you do. You'll be sobbing. You see, I was told as a child that I should wish for wild things. Things so far out there in the cosmos that even the kings and queens of alien worlds laugh in the face of them. Such dreams that, if realized, they would mean that all people are free of suffering. All people are free of a life that holds them prisoner in the clutches of misery. All people are returned to a state of harmony and peace. Is this so bad? No, of course not. But we don't want what we really want. Otherwise, they wouldn't tell us to be careful when wishing for it, for we as humans may wish for water when we're drowning. We know not what we do. That brings me to what I wanted to say. I made a wish a few days ago. I didn't really think anything of it. I definitely didn't want it, but I asked for the wish to be granted anyway. A modern boy in modern times is conditioned by his meathead friends, that of which is only so because they've been told this is the case, to get involved in things that one would never get involved in if left alone. But mixed together, preteen testosterone coursing through a middle schooler's brain, with that of the entire class egging them on, you'll get a class of boys chanting "Make 'em yak." Of course, in this particular moment, they were actually dead silent. Don't be fooled, though. This silence was far more deafening and pressuring to the mind of a middle schooler. A silence that said, "This doesn't even need to be egged on. Get on with it." All recognize the respect gained from completing unspoken tasks with the same fervor a peasant looks at gold. And as a middle schooler in need of proving myself, I unfortunately was the victim of something quite horrifying as a child. My wish was to forget. I was in Miss Gouger's class, sitting at my desk focusing on my work for the day. She had dressed like a blueberry that day. A blue coat and pants were wrapped around her orbit. In other words, she was a rather large woman. She resembled the actors who played Oompa Loompas in the Johnny Depp version and wore big, thick glasses, so thick they were the kind that old men get after eye surgery. A weaker-necked elderly man would be incapable of raising his head with Miss Gouger's daily readers on. Despite her comic book appearance and her Fran Drescher vocal tones, she was a damn good algebra teacher. This, however, did not change the fact that all children find school infuriatingly boring and a waste of time. And so I sat there, not paying attention to the subject I needed to most, doodling in the margins and corners of my paper. This was what I did to pass time, and in hindsight, it was the beginning of my career in comics. But that's neither here nor there. I ended up drawing something that alarmed even Miss Gouger, who was typically a self-proclaimed cool kitten. Gouger had a nasally voice, one that if you heard it without a face to back it up, you'd picture its owner with a scrunched nose and squinted eyes. And if you're older, you might picture Gilbert Gottfried. And that is with all due respect to both Miss Gouger and Mr. Gottfried. They're both legends. However, in my eyes, this little sketch of a man, wasn't very legendary. In fact, It was disturbing. It wasn't some everyday, degular doodle. It was the kind that makes you think something's wrong with you when you look at it. Pieces of a man floated around himself, cluttering the airspace as he seemed to look directly at whoever was looking at the page. His bloodied hands seemed to be letting his own skin fragments float down so they could melt in his body heat like snow. His face was morphed, unlike any face a human being ever laid eyes upon, let alone wielded. Blood dripped from his eyes, and the trail trickled down under his tattered clothing and into his sock, filling his boot with his own blood. The misshapen head was given the effect of shaking by squiggly lines surrounding him. His eyes were half circles, the look of complete and utter fear, and his mouth, his bottom lip, was gone, not a chance of it quivering. For blood oozed its way from the open flesh down into the already running stream of blood coming from its eye, creating a thicker, faster stream. His boot overflowed with his own body's fuel. And he looked horrified. I didn't think much of him. Every day in each class, I'd find myself doodling a face or a beast or something creepy enough to irk me. I went home later that day, spending my night playing the new Call of Duty with my friends. In the midst of my simulated warfare, I was jolted to direct my focus towards a loud bang from behind me. I got up and picked up my bag off of the floor. I guess I'd left it close to the edge, and it fell. I set it under my desk and got back to my game. Moments later, I was ripped again from my focus for something coming from behind me. Only this time, it was very, very quiet. This time, it was second by second, inch by inch. I could hear the faint sound of my backpack unzipping. My eyes locked onto the bag as my head whipped around in less than a second, but nothing. The bag hadn't moved an inch. I continued playing my game, and after a few hours longer, and thankfully a few hours of peace, I was ready for bed. It was early in the morning that I awoke to a strange noise. It was coming from under my desk, and it was muffled. However, despite the muffledness, I could clearly tell what the sound was. I don't know how to say this, but it was breathing. Raspy breaths muffled by canvas were coming from my backpack. I couldn't figure out why, but like the great minds of most middle schoolers, I ignored it. I went back to bed. But before I could fully roll over and fall back asleep, I was jolted fully awake by a loud bang and the instantaneous sound of unzipping. Following the violent unzipping was the sound of hurried footsteps across my room. They ended just beyond the edge of my bed. The raspy breathing was now much, much louder, and with it was the sound of thick liquid dripping against the hardwood floors. I turned over to peek from under the covers at what it was, and I turned over to see a bloodied man missing his lower lip, huddled at the edge of my bed. I write to you now because I'm sobbing in the wake of my wish. For years I lived with the haunting memory of that night, that horrible night. But since I've made this wish, well, last night when I laid in bed, just as I began to doze off, I heard the raspy breathing of the smiley face I drew on my math homework. Please help me. Someone.